Yeah, you got me.
Perfect. What's up? Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, man, it's great to meet you.
So what's up?
Um, yeah, man, I just wanted to like kind of walk through some this immune bio. I mean, I think it's interesting, and you pointed out a lot of the kind of critical flaws with it. But that said, from like a mechanistic perspective, I think it just has, you know, maybe more than a 40% chance, closer to like 50-50 at this point.
Okay.
Which is like not really reflected, I think, and it just makes the short a little scary and makes more sense as like a small long.
Okay.
Um, I can kind of walk you through why I think that. I don't know if you have any kind of questions or you want to direct it anywhere, but
Not
happy
really.
to
I mean,
just
I'm
kind of
pretty
walk you through.
confident in my short. Um, I don't think it has a chance to succeed, but that's what makes a market. If we could both win at the same time, I would love that. But one of us is going to
Yeah,
be right, one of us is going to be wrong.
yeah. I mean, it's speculative, and like to your point with your short thesis, like these Alzheimer's trials fail, and this one's particularly short and small, and the predicate data isn't that strong. That said, like I think there's a lot of mechanistic rationale why this could work, and there's also some data from like the TNF alpha inhibitors that suggest this is preventative. And I think the one data point that is like most interesting to me is it's coming from this 2017 Nature article, coming from Ben Baer's lab. It's titled "Neurotoxic Reactive Astrocytes Are Induced by Activated Microglia." Essentially,
Okay, I'll pull it up.
that paper kind of mechanistically lays out potentially how it is that amyloid is causing neurotoxicity.
Wouldn't this apply
And
to MS?
no, because the MS is kind of like an autoimmune. It reacts to antibodies that are like mistargeted,
Oh, it's T
right?
cells too.
Yeah, there's also T cells, but it's still like misappropriated immune targeting, right? Whereas this is just like um, amyloid beta. It shouldn't really be in the brain. Part of the process of sleep every night is, I don't know if you've heard of the glymphatic system.
Dude, I've been in biotech 25 years.
Yeah, so like, it's becoming more clear, I think mechanistically, at least to me, that the brain is supposed to clear its junk that it accumulates during the day from just normal processing and being awake. And the way it does that is by shrinking the neurons and then kind of pumping through like delta waves and beta waves, whatever, all of the junk out of the parenchyma and into the veins and the vessels, and it gets kind of flushed out. And the problem is when you don't have a good flushing process, that leads to accumulation, and then that accumulation eventually chokes out the organ and
What does
kills
this
it.
have to do with TNF?
So, so what that has to do with TNF is like a lot of the risk factors for developing Alzheimer's disease are either neuroinflammatory, as identified by GWAS, and also from an environmental
I
perspective
thought it was ApoE.
related.
I'm sorry if I'm cutting
Yeah,
you off.
no, APOE is also kind of a neuroinflammatory
I think
lipid.
the ApoE is the main thing that's really the only thing that's kind of been
So yeah, if you look
valuable.
at like GWAS studies from like, there's one in Nature Genetics from 2014, and there's been several
I
others.
mean, you don't need to look at any
There,
studies, right? ApoE is the main thing people focus on from a genetics perspective. I mean, that is the cardinal, other than autosomal dominant, ApoE is it, right? I mean, that's the thing.
no, there's others, and if you were
Okay,
to,
so you're telling me that when you go to get a gene panel, ApoE is not the most important contributor to familial Alzheimer's.
so I'm saying it's very important, but I'm saying it's also part of this neuroinflammatory cascade that's happening,
But in
right?
terms of the most important gene for familial Alzheimer's,
Yeah, it's the most important one, but the way it works is through this neuroinflammatory cascade. It's
you think
sort
so?
of consist. it's inconsistent with what I'm saying. Yeah.
How do
So
you think how do you think it's neuroinflammatory? What part of it do you think? What's its job?
so there's a paper that actually goes into the mechanism of this.
But it's is it a transcription factor? Is it a protein that does something specific? Pretty sure it has like a
No, I mean
very specific
it's a
function.
yeah, it's like a lipid, right? It's
Right.
found in like yeah. So I think it has to do with this stability of these like endothelial cells or the membranes as part of like lymphatic clearance. And so what I'm trying to get to, right? Let me just kind of finish what I was trying to say. The lymphatic system is meant to clear out the brain. If you don't have good clearance over the course of decades, you eventually accumulate all this junk and it kills the brain. There's a lot of risk factors with respect to neuroimmune genes like APOE and BIN1 and IBO. There's a lot of these markers that have been kind of accumulating on microglia and astrocytic genes more than neuronal cells. And then the other risk factors involve like cardiovascular risk factors. So people who have diabetes, people who have statins. And so basically you have kind of a motivation to keep those vessels nice and clean and open. And so back to this mechanistic paper from 2017, basically this is coming out of Ben Baer's lab. And it's kind of a shame because Ben Baer's published this in 2017, kind of shaking up the world a little bit, and then he actually died that year from pancreatic cancer, and there hasn't been a lot of follow-up. There's been a few papers here and there, but it's kind of tough when you lose the leader in the space. But what he found is that these amyloid species kind of start to accumulate in the brain, and then that leads to activation of the microglia, and then eventually of the astrocytes, and together they start to kill off the neurons. And he found, if you look at, I don't know if you have it open.
Yeah.
If you look at like figure 1A, there's like kind of two distinct types of astrocytes that he found, this like A1 and A2. And it's the A1s that are actually neurotoxic, right? And the whole paper kind of goes into the mechanistic drivers of these A1 cells and their killing capacity, and they're dependent on IL-1 alpha, TNF, and C1q, whereas these other A2 non-killing astrocytes just don't have these expressed at all. And then kind of later on in the paper, they go on to prove that like just activating these three factors is necessary and sufficient to create kind of killing astrocytes. So I don't know, like maybe, XPro is just one of those three legs of the stool. It's maybe not enough. But I think it's certainly interesting. And then, going back to XPro and the design of the trial itself, I think one of the criticisms is rightfully so, is like, this is a 200 patient study over 6 months or so, which is like, basically lecanemab and Kasuna are like 2,000 in like 2 years. But actually, if you look closely at the data, lecanemab would have hit stat sig or been very close to it at 6 months.
With a lot of patients.
With 2,000 patients, that's for sure. But INmune had an interim analysis, right? And they looked at like the standard deviation, and they saw that it was consistent with their powering assumptions. So I think, at least that's behaving okay. And then the other thing is they're enriching their trial for patients who are thought to be kind of like super responders or super progressors. And so they have things like APOE positivity, they have diabetics, they have elevated ESR, which is like an inflammatory biomarker, and elevated CRP. And you have to have like, one of these 5 markers, and like 20% of them have double, or at least 2 of them. And so like you have this kind of setup where you're accumulating patients that are probably on a rapid progression because of just how sick they are from a cardiovascular perspective to Alzheimer's progression. At the same time, like lecanemab was pretty close, or if not likely to hit stat sig at 6 months. And so like this drug, I think we know from the science paper, and I think he did a lot of good work on this, is definitely active. And so the question is not, is this a real drug? It's more like, does it work? And I think there's just enough tidbits here, including their own, like, albeit weak biomarker data, to suggest this thing is definitely anti-inflammatory, and it potentially could be doing something, as evidenced by like some of the MRI scans where they see like more white matter remyelination, and the reductions in like NFL, neurofilament light protein, and as well as some of the other inflammatory markers. I think there is still a question of like, does it need to get into the brain? And on that point, like, I'm not sure that it matters that much. Maybe the little amount that does get into the brain should be enough. But if you look at like, the TNF alpha inhibitors, those therapies are able to like reduce the incidence of Alzheimer's in patients with RA, with rheumatoid arthritis, and they're not getting into the brain.
That's a lot of that's a little bit of a dubious statement, but
no, I mean, there was a paper published in PLOS One a couple of years ago.
Was it a prospective clinical trial?
No,
okay.
No, it was
just
like
making
basically
sure I didn't miss
looking at
anything.
like, it was basically looking at tens of thousands of just patient data from like EHR or whatever. Where basically
you can't take
a cohort.
You can't take the EHR data to the FDA and get approval, right?
No. What I'm saying is like there's evidence to suggest that these TNF antibodies are protective against Alzheimer's. And yeah, it's not high quality data. That's what I'm saying, is like this whole story is like standing up on, like twigs and like put together with like staples and bubble gum. But
yeah,
it is like it's definitely like enticing. And I think, with like a 5-to-1 payout, I don't know that, like, that basically implies, I guess, like maybe 20% chance that it's successful. And I think it might be. I think it's a little better than that.
Yeah, you could say it's 100-to-1 payout. You could say it's a 2-to-1 payout. I mean, that's kind of an arbitrary.
No, but on the day of, it probably goes to $1 billion, right?
I don't know. You could go to 10 billion. I really don't know.
I mean,
it's hard to say.
I think it's hard to say for sure. I mean, the thing is like massively shorted, and no one thinks it's going to work. It's definitely going to zero if it fails.
You think so?
Or like, yeah, it'll go to cash.
Do you think what happens to you if you think they say that they need more time to analyze the data, the primary endpoint was not met, but they're encouraging trends? What do you think happens?
I think the Emax needs to kind of have a strong trend.
Like better than 0.1 maybe, or 0.2, or?
I mean, they think they can hit stats if you talk to them.
No, I know. I'm sure they think they can. They designed the study that way. But in terms of,
it needs to be compelling enough, because like these guys need cash,
and is that
they don't have
0.1 or 0.2 or?
If it's, I think it has to be like 0.3.
0.03 or 0.3?
0.3.
So 0.3 or better.
Yeah, like on the delta basis.
No, I'm talking about p-value.
Oh, p-value. Oh, let's see. Let me pull up my stats here. I think it also depends on if they present the curves, right?
Yeah.
I don't know that you can really get away with anything less than 0.1.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Anything more than 0.1, yeah. So I think it has to be pretty close.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's a chance that the general. I mean, by the way, are you an institutional investor or?
Yeah.
Okay, but you haven't filed on the stock or 13F or anything.
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, this is more like fun, like the fact that I'm like even, chatting with you, and, I just wanted to take the opportunity. Cause it's
why I'm such a little guy?
No, not because
Okay.
of that. Because like it's like not really
Yeah, this
good
isn't.
business practice to give off your like edge, you know?
Yes. I mean, I talk to a lot of hedge funds, but
No,
regardless,
but you know what I mean. Like it just complicates the setup to
a
like
little bit
be over.
depends. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
depends.
yeah. I mean, I think in this case, there's no shortage of long opportunity if you believe in it, right? So,
But
um,
that's what I'm saying is like I just think that every data point is very weak, but it all trends in the right direction. And even like yeah, I think you did a good job of looking at that neurology paper where they looked at the Enbrel in these patients in the UK, and it was like touted to be a failure by the industry. But I think you kind of saw that hey, there's like an effect here, and
I wouldn't say there's an effect, but
it's
it's worth putting
it's
magnifying
super
glass on.
right, exactly. And so that's the point. Is just like who knows, like it's probably 50-50 or so, probably maybe worse than that, but it's not like 10 to 15%, I don't think.
Yeah,
And so those are the kinds of like small bets you kind of make, and it's like certainly better than a lottery ticket.
yeah. I mean, I obviously have a difference of opinion. One of the things that concerns me is their cytokine panel. So the panel showed that at the highest dose, they reduced some of those cytokines that are in the paper you showed me by only 10 or 15%. And we all know that TNF is just a mediator of gene expression. That does not actively do anything, right? It's a downstream effector, just like NF
Yeah.
kappa B or even IL-6 or IL-1. And the genes that it's supposed to turn on or off, it's not really moving the expression needle very much. Is 10% cytokine changes enough? That seems to me like maybe a day of drinking. Is it enough to really move the needle?
Yeah, I mean it's a good point. I'd say that like it's 10 to 15% on average, and they have other ones that are standing out there in like the 25-40% range. Who knows if they picked the right ones? Like this is also CSF. Like what is the you know baseline level of that versus what is it at the local tissue level? I just think like
They also
you have
didn't do
there's
a
so much.
placebo group in this
Yeah,
phase 1, so you can't even trust this 10% data.
yeah.
I mean, what if this is the whole
Well,
reason?
you can assume the point 0.3 mg per kg is like placebo, right? Because it probably doesn't have much of an effect.
Yeah, the point. Well, they didn't even show all the data. You know, in fact, like you really do need a placebo. I mean, I've designed some drugs, done a lot of trials. It's pretty good to have a. It doesn't cost much. Just do a trial with some data that shows you. Because like
So
actually,
yeah,
the PK tells you
yeah,
that point 0.3 is probably active as well, and
yeah.
point 0.6 is definitely active. Where's that data? So I feel
Well,
like
it's there.
well, they've never published anything, um,
Yeah.
which is wonderful, because we know how that works out. And I would assume it's not for lack of trying. I mean, you know, I, how hard is it to publish phase 1 data in some cruddy journal? Like,
Yeah,
um,
I asked them that. And they basically were like, we prioritize on other things, which is like not a great answer.
yeah,
And I agree with you.
they're
It's
kind of
like totally
clowns.
sketch. Yeah, it's kind of clowny and sketchy. And the thing is, though, that they like kind of bootstrap this whole thing. Like they own
Understood.
most of the company, and like they kind of just scrapped together 4 or 5 million bucks and like did this thing. It's a pet project. They're running out of Boca Raton. Like there's a lot of red, like yellow flags here. Um, but it's just so sexy from like a biology perspective.
We can talk about that too in a second. But in terms of like the phase 1 data, very very modest change in cytokine, and that's kind of cherry picking because was the point 0.6 data that didn't drop lower cytokine levels, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like up a little bit to flat.
So if I don't know how many medicines that at point 0.6. One, I appreciate the conversation. None of this is ad hominem whatsoever, so don't take any of this personally, and vice versa. This is a great conversation. It's obviously you're not one of these crazies in their Discord. But if I mean, if 0.6x of a dose does something that 1.0x of a dose doesn't do, that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. There's not too many medicines that work that way.
Yeah, but do you think the drug is not active, or you think it's not active in the brain?
It could be. I mean, well, the only readout we have to go off of, right, is this panel. And if the
Yeah,
drug in
and
that,
the tau data.
we can, yes, we'll look at that in a second next. But starting with the panel, if this is a legitimate assay, zero point 0.6 should show just as much effect as 1.0. Now, of course, as you know, and everybody knows, there's some like saturable gradient that you might have to overcome, right? Like there's, there are drugs that don't work, and once they reach a threshold, they start working. But it would seem like the 0.6 is very, very close to 1.0. It's a very small difference, not even a doubling of the drug. And the effect at 1 mg is not very high. In fact, I would say it's placebo-like. So to me, that data is enough to say that you're not getting target engagement. I mean, target engagement should just jump off the screen, right? Biological result, you can wait on that. But the way I was taught to make medicine is, you try to find the target engagement. And, this is like, especially without a placebo group, you look at the other doses as, okay, do these engage the target? And, usually you do some different, like 0.3, 0.6, 1.0. They did a 3.0 in cancer, interestingly. They decided to back off that dose. Not sure why. But it seems to me like, I'm not sure they found their target engagement. But they went ahead anyway with the phase 2. At least on the cytokine panel, I'm a little mystified.
Yeah, it's junky. I mean, that's very fair criticism. It's really crappy.
Okay, that's fine.
But
I appreciate it. We could talk about the
yeah,
biology then. Okay, so biology. So you're
well
familiar with
then,
my.
what about the tau data? Like, what do you think
I
about
don't.
that one?
I don't even have their data because like it's scattered across like hundreds of fucking little presentations that no longer even exist.
Oh, you can look
Um,
at the corporate deck.
yeah, it's just like this isn't. It's like so
Yeah, it's for
cruddy.
sure.
But while I look that
Yeah,
up, talking about biology, I'm sure you're familiar with my prednisone thesis.
yeah, I saw that. I mean, it's a good point, but prednisone on its own is like, it can cause like delirium and like has like a lot of other issues with
But
it.
on a mean
And so,
basis, it does not. The average person does not lose their mind when they take prednisone.
but people who are like, you know, on the cusp of losing their mind do tend to have more side effects.
Yeah, I don't know. That's sort of like a bit of an unpublished statement. I mean, I think that the acceleration of delirium or deliria with dementia, it's actually fairly rare. Um, I do think there's side effects with long-term prednisone, which is why we don't give it. But you would think the master switch drug that sort of encompasses TNF, it's not a good thing that it doesn't seem to help. Um, it's not like the second you pop a prednisone, you start losing your mind. We all know that's not the case.
Um, I mean, it kind of does. Like, people get delirious.
Do
They
you?
get confused, disoriented,
You've
change
taken
their
prednisone,
awareness.
right?
Uh, I haven't taken it, but I've taken other weaker ones, and it definitely, for me anyway, at least, makes me a little manic.
Yeah,
Um,
it can have different psychiatric effects like that, but I think
yeah.
it doesn't turn you into demented. I mean, that's fairly rare, and there's dose reduction and stuff like that. But you know, ultimately, I think that the gradient of how much immunosuppression and anti-inflammatory are you getting out of prednisone, interrupting the disease process versus it's doing that so heavy that it's causing dementia. I'm not sure that those are the same ends of the same curve, right? So like, I think
Yeah.
you almost want it. I don't think it's a good sign that one, TNFs don't help you in MS. Two, TNFs, or the little bit of data we have in TNFs in Alzheimer's is murky. And then three, steroids don't seem to help you, in Alzheimer's. In many other auto-inflammatory like NSAIDs, COX-2, et cetera, they don't help either. And by the way, as you know, I'm trying to read every paper on TNF alpha and Alzheimer's. There were many, many people that did these little preclinical studies of, atorvastatin cures the mouse with Alzheimer's. Naproxen cures the mouse with Alzheimer's. Celecoxib cures the mouse with Alzheimer's. And of course, all those trials didn't replicate in humans. Despite huge trials, there wasn't even a trend. In prednisone, I mean, it seems to accelerate, dementia, which to me seems to suggest that maybe you do need TNF alpha in the brain to help clear cellular debris, including, through lymphatics. You want some, of the TNF death receptor properties that are going to help you grab all this broken stuff and throw it away. Otherwise, you might actually get more accumulation of this stuff and get yourself into way more trouble. So, to me, if this was really all an inflammation problem, naproxen, celecoxib, steroids, something might work in that vein. I think Alzheimer's could be very, very different, and we just don't know what's going on, whether it's complement or it could be something like, iron related. It could be ferroptosis kind of thing. It could be one of these things where it's autophagy kind of, ubiquitome related. We just don't really know. And we also don't know when you can start treatment and when do these things flip maybe from being beneficial in the case of TNF to being not beneficial. It's just a lot of question marks, and I'm not sure these guys have done a great job of answering any of it. It's not the worst thesis I've ever seen. I mean, it's not cassava. Cassava was worse.
Yeah, right. That just didn't even have a mechanism. It was just like a dart on the wall. Okay. I mean, some of those are fair points. I don't know if you've seen these meta-analyses with like NSAID exposure and reduced Alzheimer's risk.
Yes.
I mean, those are kind of interesting. And
there are data that fail to replicate.
Did you see this New Amsterdam this week?
What they do?
They have this drug obicetrapib that helps with.
I'm familiar with it.
Or I think it was last week. But they have a cohort in their trial.
Alzheimer's cohort. Disease.
Yeah, and they showed some preservation there. With a biomarker. I mean, and then like there's the GLP-1 study that's running this year, and that should read out like around fourth quarter. We know that GLP-1 helps a lot with the cardiovascular risk, but also reduces things like CRP, just kind of downstream of these inflammatory things. So I hear you on the prednisone thing. I just think like prednisone is napalm, and prednisone doesn't help with like heart attack, but aspirin does. You know what I mean?
My experience in this world is that when you have nothing to go on, you have to go to the next best thing. And the next best thing gives you some tea leaves. Like, hey, they tried deep immunosuppression and Alzheimer's didn't work. They tried deep autoinflammatory and Alzheimer's didn't work. So I think a lot of pharma say is, like, even with the million X upside for Humira or for Immunex and Amgen and all these companies, like, it's still not worth. Now, look, pharma's stupid as hell. They make mistakes all the time. But I know the AbbVie guys. They are not stupid. I'm surprised they never did a study of Humira. Maybe it's because of BBB stuff, but it's still surprising because you would think you could do a peripheral sync where you solubilize the peripheral TNF and then you create a concentration gradient from the BBB. This is what, of course, the A-beta antibodies did. I mean, I think it's, it's not the worst idea in the world for sure. It's just a question of like, as well as anybody, how many nodes there are in the autoimmune landscape. You can do IL-1, you could do IL-6, you could do TREM2, you could do NF-kappa B, there's 100 ways to interrogate the immune system. Which one is the one that's going to win,
Right.
if any? And going through it one trial at a time, praying for serendipity, that's like I mean, it's definitely begs the question of like, do you look at the world as like, you know, I'm writing the lotto ticket, or do you look at the world as like you're saying, like if it's a 30% chance of success, I mean, you would buy these every day, but you also do need to hit at some point. we at least for Alzheimer's, we haven't hit yet, and it could start. I mean, they didn't hit for obesity for a long time, and now we got all kinds of great mechanisms for obesity. So
Yeah. Um, I'm not really sure where to
no,
respond,
that's
but
fine.
I
I mean,
mean, I
the
think if you think it's like, if you think it's like 30 to 40% chance, and it's actually 30 to 40% chance, and you make a 5x off of that, and yeah, you do take those every time. It's kind of Bayesian, right? You have to make sure you're actually swinging at 30 to 40% chance events. Um,
and you get
but
some, you're getting the privates, you're getting, the big pharma bets that you don't really get exposure to. So like this
yeah,
is like one bet, but
yeah,
Elector was another, but a bunch of these are like either not for profit or they're inside big pharma. So like
yeah,
you might get that 30,
yeah.
40% at Lilly.
And on the pharma side, like I would say that they're pretty like risk averse. Like these BD guys,
I agree.
like don't really want to take a lot of risks. Even the R&D guys, and there's not really a market for Alzheimer's just yet. I mean, we had the whole aducanumab or Aduhelm and lecanemab debacles with the FDA, and I think part of the reason the FDA was eager to push those through is because if you don't approve anything for Alzheimer's, no one's going to develop anything.
Right.
So, to have like at least a pathway on something that's crappy but has like signals of efficacy kind of starts to make that market. And, that only happened in the last couple of years. So for like AbbVie and Pfizer to like not push the immune thesis in Alzheimer's isn't like that surprising.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think some have tried, right? Abbott, not AbbVie more, but Abbott has definitely gone into this territory. I think Lilly, is pretty aggressive, but Lilly partnered with my friend's privately held company, extremely early stage. So I think there's some people interested. I mean, Biogen did a few things. Eh,
It's just early days.
yeah, I think that if it were me, I would do a 5-year clinical trial. I would do 1,000 patients, and I would do it as subclinical as possible. But reality
Right.
is it's really hard to do that way. And as I constructed this like panel of all autoimmune drugs and where they've been tested, it's a really fascinating thing because I thought I knew this space. I mean, this is like half of all biopharma, is autoimmune,
Yeah.
autoinflammatory. And what's interesting is, I thought at some point Biogen tried to do or wanted to do VLA4 Tysabri for Alzheimer's because it makes a ton of sense. And they didn't. I thought maybe you try CD20 for Alzheimer's. Never been tried. So you haven't tried B cells or T cells. And
Yeah, but the microglia are they're macrophages, they're monocytes.
right, but they still it's still possible that there's a I mean look at MS, right? It's a T cell or B cell.
It's totally
Um,
different though.
well, you have I mean, is it?
One is like one is an autoimmune waxing and waning disease, and the other is a neurodegenerative progressive disease. It's like
Why does CD20 work and why does VLA4 work?
yeah, it works for MS because those are basically the B cells and T cells get into the brain. But
Yes.
that's not what happens in Alzheimer's. This is like monocyte driven. It's like it's targeting a different arm of the immune system. It's the innate immune system.
Well, TNFs were tried once, as we know, with kind of a little bit of a weird, you know, um, answer there, and then steroids, do target both.
Yeah.
And, there's other attempts that have failed. I mean, IVIG is another one. But yeah, most of these attempts haven't been tried, and there've been definitely worse ideas out there. TNF was tried in asthma. TNF was tried in all kinds of places, and none of them really panned out. So it's not that clear. Like TNF was tried in sepsis, which you could argue is maybe a little bit like AD. So it's pretty interesting to see where these things work and where they don't. Even TNF not working in osteoarthritis is somewhat interesting. But yeah, I mean, I understand you have a heavy autoimmune disease in MS, but you still have downstream effectors that are kind of overlapping, and so making it worse is very eye-opening. It's a different disease, no doubt about it, but it does seem to drive the disease. And to me, that's pretty alarming, because if you have a brain autoimmune disease, using TNF you think would help. Anti-TNF, of course. But we'll see.
So what's your criticism of the like the payer data that shows Alzheimer's disease is protected in patients who get these drugs?
There are data that conflict with it. So as you know, I mean, when you do a big old, search of a very big space, you'll find what you're looking for, and things will jump out by accident. But there have been attempts to replicate the data that have not gone well. So that's kind of I've seen like there's an abatacept paper where they compare abatacept to TNF, and they found that it's no better than abatacept at preventing Alzheimer's, which is not at all. So I think it depends on the health data you look at. And you also have big problem with like correlation causation. I mean, is there another explanation for the result? Could it be that these patients are of a certain demographic where they're getting TNFs? Could it be that there's some other confounder? There usually is, that is more likely, including chance, than explaining a causal phenomenon. And again, in certain other, if there was a really strong causal phenomenon, you would not have efficacy. Now, one of the problems is almost all RA patients are treated with these drugs at some point. So it's kind of messy data to begin with, but
yeah, that's fair. I mean, these are just massive data sets and then work across multiple drugs.
Yeah, I think the data
TNF
sets.
inhibitors.
I've seen some papers that have failed to replicate it. So to me, it's like a classic post hoc observation that just can't be really relied upon, and it's driving a lot of the investment thesis here. I heard this thesis 10 years ago, by the way, in different pharma corners talking about. I had a friend, very successful entrepreneur, who said, if you have a family member with Alzheimer's, get them on Enbrel. And they pointed to this data that I think started roughly 10 years ago, but nobody really bid on it. I mean, everybody sent it around and talked about it, and the immune guys bid on it, but it's intriguing, but I don't know if it's convincing enough to go do a clinical trial. Especially given
run a better one.
Yeah. I mean, if they get a signal, they get a signal, right? As long as do you think they're gonna? Let me ask you this: do you think they're gonna put out the top line data?
Yeah, they're gonna put it out next week.
So definitely Emax X, Emax Y.
It's gonna be Emax and CDR, some of the secondaries.
But they're not gonna like say it wasn't stat sig, or they're gonna say.
They're gonna give everything.
Okay. If they give the top line numbers, I'll be happy.
Yeah, it'll give top line numbers.
I would make a side bet with you that it makes it worse. Not a real money side bet, but just a gentleman's bet.
Okay. You want? Okay, I will take that for sure.
All right, you're on. I'll bet you a nice Coca-Cola or something. It's probably against SEC rules as we speak, but
You should
one,
pull up this tumor necrosis. TNF blocking agents are associated with lower risk of Alzheimer's disease.
yeah, I've seen these. Yeah, I mean,
The plus one, yeah.
there are recent papers that dispute this, and I think that if I don't know, I feel like I'm very stubborn with retrospective data.
Yeah, that's fair. All
It
right, do you know this company Tourmaline?
Yes,
So it's kind of related, kind of adjacent. But the idea is like if you look at longitudinal data, it was published like last year in the
oh
New
yeah,
England
I
Journal of
mean,
Medicine.
IL-1 went through this journey with Ilaris.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like, everything we thought about heart disease with respect to like the lipids and stuff seems to be kind of secondary to this like inflammatory um,
Yeah, yeah,
phenotype, right? Like
everything's
the more
inflammatory. Everything.
the more inflamed you are, like the more uh, like heart disease and stuff you have. Um, I guess the reason I bring it up is because it's like uh, it's interesting to believe that like the immune system is what's really driving like heart attacks and like
Sure.
can be kind of adjacent to this idea. It's like, okay, yeah, you have junky amyloid buildup here, but it's secondary to um, the immune system in the brain just going haywire and killing everything.
Yeah, I just sent the TNF signaling pathway from KEGG. I don't know how much you look at these KEGG charts,
Mm-hmm.
um, or like at some of the other pathway charts, but like there's a lot of molecules on this thing, and where exactly are we hitting, and why is the question. And obviously, people have tried. As you may know, Denali, I think, tried RIP K1 or one of these things. They've tried P38, which is upstream, I think, of TNF or maybe downstream. Um,
Well, you're hitting the soluble, right? So it's basically upstream of everything here.
right, right. So, a lot have tried to sort of like nail this down, and I think P38, RIP, all these have failed. P38's downstream of at least TNFR2. I think it's also TNFR1. And you get some of these transcription factor selectivity where maybe you want to use, RIP K1, but that didn't work. P38, which didn't work. Which one of these is the exact answer? And again, my sort of simplest conclusion is that this is actually very difficult, and if it's one of these, it's not the one we're after, and if it's and more likely it's not on one of these lists, and it's something more complicated. For the same reason we can't treat schizophrenia, for the same reason we can't treat depression. This is sort of a meta phenomenon, right? Like the problem with Alzheimer's, one of the problems is there's no like, cognitive test is so downstream of like this meta process.
Yeah,
So it's like, is it
yeah.
synaptic pruning? It could be something as simple as, just like, I don't know if you ever looked at Shank or any of these other like synapse proteins, but there's a whole
Mm-hmm.
bunch of like synaptopathies and like Shankopathies. So like I worked on this thing called Shank3, which is just a very bizarre like little protein, but it's critical in making important synaptic connections, and like just something that like interrupts this thing by accident could be it. There's thousands of potential proteins that are implicated in Alzheimer's. I think the best bet is APOE, and while I was in prison, of all things, I wanted to make an APOE corrector. And I think Vertex and a few other companies have looked at this, one particular company, but that's private, where the difference between APOE, what is it, epsilon 3 versus epsilon 4 and epsilon 2, it's all one amino acid. And you should be able to knock in, the same way Vertex does correctors, knock in the right conformation. And you
Right.
go from, look at the data, it's so compelling. APOE2 is 10x protective versus APOE4. You should be able to fix the disease that way. And I think somebody's doing APOE gene therapy, right? One of these public, like Lyra or somebody, I forget who. Somebody's
Right.
doing one of these. I forget what. It's like a really small market cap too, and it's APOE for like Lenti or AAV, and that to me seems like a home run. Now can you get expression with it? I mean, it's very hard with the gene therapy, but I'd even make an APOE for just pump it in recombinant. And maybe you get a ride on LDL receptor to the brain or something, but you should be able to get enough there, or you make the corrector that traffics to the brain. But either way, like it certainly seems like ApoE is the answer, at least one of the main answers you can rest your head on and say this is actually causal of the disease. You're born with the wrong isoform, you're getting Alzheimer's. You're born with the right isoform, you're protected from Alzheimer's. I mean, how much better can you get than that? And the answer could be in lipids. And again, what's the downstream effector? It would be nice to know, but ApoE is function is a bit mysterious, right?
Yeah, there's been some papers recently that are trying to understand it, but yeah, I mean, I hear you. It's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's at least the best, scientific evidence, I think. And then, yeah, the way the brain works is like I've been working a lot in AI. My girl works at one of the big AI companies, and like these neural networks really seem like they are very similar to the brain. And when you prune 5 or 10% of a neural network, you just literally set the weights to 0. Nothing happens. It still works. It's kind of amazing. And as you prune these weights a little bit more, you can do this to save disk space, for example. You end up like slowly eroding the function of the neural network. And at some point, it becomes so garbled it doesn't work anymore. And it certainly seems like our brains are neural networks. So to me, I think through some of this and say like, some of this could just be irreparable. It's just entropy working its way through the system, and there's literally no way out. It's kind of like liver disease or IPF or some of these like really, maybe liver's not great because they do seem to have antifibrotics that are working, but certain fibrotic diseases there's just no way out. Entropy will take over and you lose. But in terms of the AI neural network stuff, it really is fascinating to see how similar it is.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what do you think of the GLP-1 in Alzheimer's?
I don't think it's causal enough. I think it's so too distant. Like,
You don't think it's going to work?
no, I don't think so. I mean, I hope so, right? But
Yeah.
I'd be surprised. I mean, I think, like I said, when you're dealing, like I said, take the neural network that OpenAI works on or something Google works on, from just literally variables that contain weights. There's no code in any of these neural networks. They're just numbers. And you could think of them as like calcium concentrations in a cell. And their connections and the way they cycle is what's important. And so you think about Alzheimer's, like cognition arises from the synapses and their connections. And you're sort of like really far away, I think, from with TNF. You're talking about cell survival. It's not the part of this that matters, which is delicate, like synaptic, conservation and synaptic pruning and learning and all these things that are like really just it's totally different branch of biology. I think that's what's getting disrupted.
My pushback to that would be that, yes, you're right, you can prune most of the brain and it continues to work, but at some point you're at the critical juncture, right? Where like any more pruning and any more pruning and you start to see, real effects. And that's what these inclusion criteria try to enrich for, right? They try to enrich for patients who are on the brink of noticeable dementia.
But are we going to get that benefit from something so orthogonal to the learning process, the arborization of cell-to-cell communication? This stuff TNF is working on is like very much like the end product of cell death, whereas at the higher meta level, like the difference between being completely crazy and being a Nobel Prize winner is just some small synaptic rearrangement. And it feels like
it's like brain fog, right? Brain fog goes away after one NSAID.
Yeah, Yeah, that's an interesting perspective from like the GABA side maybe. But you can see how all the like GABA, NMDA, there have been attempts, as you know, to do muscarinics in Alzheimer's. There have been attempts to do what the mGluR. There's still attempts to do mGluR for like
Yeah.
just what is the generic like synaptic speed, and like glutamate is like almost the oil of the brain. But yeah, the just like reading about how memories are constructed and how we form, and learn things, it's fairly
Yeah.
clear that this is really really hard stuff. And the metacognition, it would be one thing if it's MS, where it's like, okay, we're attacking the nerve system, that's bad, need to stop attacking, great. Alzheimer's, what we're fundamentally trying to save in cognition is something that we don't understand. It's very meta. There's no The brain gives rise to consciousness and intelligence that it's hard to fathom why that happens and how it happens, and we don't understand it. So to save it,
Right, but I'm giving you like a plausible
yes,
mechanism, right? It's like, hey, you have this junk in the brain that doesn't get out because your blood vessels are caked with amyloid from years of obesity or diabetes or just age, and that caking leads to a backup, and that backup activates the microglia and the astrocytes to kill everything. So if you just stop their ability to kill through like a TNF alpha inhibitor, then maybe you can save cognition, right? I'm not saying they're going to get better. I'm saying the other guys are, on the decline, and maybe these guys decline less.
yeah, no, I think it's a good hypothesis. I think the other end of it that I guess I'm trying to point out is the gigantic synaptosome, of like 200 or 300 proteins that regulate the construction of synapses. And
But there's nothing wrong with them,
yeah,
right?
they're both,
Like,
I think, kind of important.
no, but there's nothing wrong with them fundamentally, like a genetic basis of like,
Well, we don't know if
people
amyloid beta is causing
people
a big problem.
people with Alzheimer's aren't, um, you know, cognitively impacted earlier in their lives. They become that way.
Right. It takes time. And maybe it's, again, a process we don't understand vis-a-vis amyloid beta and APOE and totally other branch of biology. And TNF's actually trying to save the day. It's getting called by accident, and it's doing more damage than good, or it's doing more good than damage. Both hypotheses are actually pretty reasonable. I have some papers that actually show that. I mean, there's a paper for every hypothesis, which is the funniest
Right.
part, right? Like,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and I think like the
No,
synaptome
I,
is something to think about.
I think we're actually kind of in agreement, but we just kind of take the other side.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. And TREM2,
um,
yeah, somebody's mentioning TREM2. I think, yeah, I mean, real well, TREM2 did not work. And
yeah. So
the
it's
quite,
interesting. There's some pretty compelling data to suggest that Elector's construct was inferior to Vigil's, and
hmm,
then Vigil got taken out by Sanofi, I think like a couple weeks ago.
right, right. So it maybe
Um,
still has a chance.
it still has a chance, but also kind of, yeah, TBD. I don't know. Um,
What do you think it happens Monday?
I don't know about Monday, but definitely by the end of the month.
Yeah, yeah. I'm guessing they have it. I just hope that they're honest, for your sake and my sake. Like, being trying to spin it isn't going to do anyone any good. Do you think the management team is that kind of management team, or?
Um, I think they'll be honest. I mean, they're going to show the top line data with numbers and p values. So, uh,
That's, yeah, all you really ask for, right?
yeah, I mean, they're pretty optimistic. Um, the trial should have closed like over a month ago now. I don't think they've seen the data, but um, who knows?
What worries me is like
Uh,
if you have a family that's like very, not, I'm sorry, not a family, a couple of individuals that are running the company, they started it, they're really married to this thesis, they see the data, it's bad. They start saying, well, what about mild to moderate? Maybe we could stratify for patients who are really sick, et cetera, et cetera. And they just start to
yeah,
comb through the thing like crazy.
they need money though,
Yes, that
right?
is
So
true.
like, if they can't convince people to give them money, it's a zero. Like
Yeah,
they have to show enough for investors to be like, all right, here's $300 million.
or $10 million.
For like a proper phase 3 program.
No, I mean just to keep existing. And
Oh yeah.
I mean, we've seen all
But
these
then
pipes. Like people
but
do
then it's like a
pipes.
short. It'll fade.
Yeah, but people do pipes that just keep these companies going, and hope springs eternal. They do ATMs. They do other deals. They just find a way to continue
Yeah,
existing.
they could hit the ATM and like exist, but it'll be lower valuation, I imagine.
I think so too.
I think I don't. I guess I don't think there's really a risk to us, getting the trade wrong because of like management's presentation. I think it's either going to hit or it's not going to hit. It'll be pretty clear, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, hit me up on Twitter or whatever if you want to keep talking. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, man, this is great. Cool stuff that you do, and you have
Thank
pretty
you.
like active following and good calls. You kind of emboldened me on the Sava. So it's like I knew that thing was a fraud for years, but
Awesome. So you made some money?
yeah, man, you were
I'm glad to
you're
hear that.
helpful there.
Capricorn should be really interesting.
I don't know. Like the
There's some
data is pretty suspect, but I don't know how motivated this FDA is.
Now
Like,
that
what's your
Sarepta
take?
happened, they're just gonna stand, cross their arms, and say, "No fucking way! Like you gotta be fucking kidding me! We're not doing this shit again.
Yeah,
Like we can't
I mean this one's
unwind."
not as unsafe, but
I mean, they just can't unwind the Sarepta debacle because people are on the drug. You can't just stop taking it, and you can't unwind an approval, but you can prevent new approvals.
yeah, that's fair. I think so too, but it's just like so retail-y, so squeezy, that like I got to be careful with those.
All of these stocks are. It's like so hard to find a good short that's like not consensus or whatever. Um,
Yeah,
Somebody wants to know if you've looked at the quantum computing companies. It sounds like you just do biotech.
yeah, no, I mostly do biotech. I think I don't know, like I think I was listening to some of your stuff. It seems reasonable, but it's hard to fight the trend.
Yes.
And there's so much excess capital like flowing into AI that like if you're a Fidelity or BlackRock to put in like 100 million in or like $1 billion in AI and then throw like 50 million by the way of quantum kind of makes sense, and
Yep.
it kind of takes time for these uh, like trades to pan out, and it's like a matter of
It's
flows
funny.
and
I did an analysis of every bubble I could think of from the past, including
yeah,
the dot-com bubble, which I lived through. And my memory is that these things happened really fast, but the data is that they take about a year, sometimes longer. So
yeah,
our memory is like, oh yeah, we shorted it, we were heroes, we kicked it out of the park, it was easy. But
it's painful.
it was like the dot-com thing was really easy for me because I showed up on Wall Street at the exact top. But
Okay,
for dot-coms, Soros and Tiger had already thrown in the towel. They basically closed their firms down because they couldn't short any more dot-coms. It was so infuriating. And that's the way I feel about quantum. And if it's not quantum, there's other people short like the VTOLs or nuclear or whatever. And like Circle is I don't know if you've seen Circle, but they priced the thing at like 30 and it's almost at
yeah,
300. But
insane.
anyway, last one
I
is
saw you. I saw you were day trading it. That's all I saw.
yeah, I almost felt like FOMO. Have you looked at Compass?
Yeah, I have.
What do you
I
think?
think we're not. I mean, I think it should be fine, but we're not going to get clarity on the durability until the second half of 26. So
But it's probably going
kind
to
of like
work, you think? I think it has a chance.
yeah, I think it'll probably work. They're a little bit suspect on like the safety profile, a suicidality signal. So like, I don't know really how to read it, but I think we're not going to really have a clear answer until second half of 26. But in the meantime, like RFK likes psychedelics, so it's just kind of an impossible thing to trade.
Yeah, I mean, if they come out and they have a real signal, I mean, I don't
It's
think that's
up.
a bad thing. But you also have that GHRS, and it kind of just shows you any psychedelic gives you a signal here.
Right. Yeah, GHRS completely faded the move. So
Yeah. All
I
right,
don't
brother.
know.
Thank you for your time.
All right, man. Yeah, take care.
See ya.
See ya.
Cool. All right. Yeah. So let's see. People have different perspectives on things. Sometimes you tell somebody, "I'll give you a 10% chance to make 10x your money," and they say, "That sounds great." Other people say, "Oh, a 10% chance. There's no way that's going to happen." And for humans, statistics are very hard to like parse. I'm not saying I'm right, by the way. For some people, they'll look at expected value and say, "I'm just going to do the expected value." But Kahneman wrote a lot about this, where it's very hard to perceive expected value. Most people either bake in an irrational pessimism, maybe irrational optimism. I don't know, but there's been a lot of work done on that, on those mental models. All right, I'm going to keep reading though.